Hi, everyone. Nice to see you. Nice to have the array of being here, the array of the temple assembling itself. It's a nice thing. It's nice to be, you know, it's nice to be, it's an easy way to be happy. If the Zen makes you happy, that's it's kind of simple and clueless and wonderful. Anything in life can make you happy. That's the salt and source of life. So what I'll do is let's I think some people are still coming on, and let's meditate a bit together. The sound of the temple bell. It's a kind of salt and sauce, And the sound of the rain. Just taking everyone in. It's one of the things of Zen, to just let life in, to let life have us. Great thing. I've never. How is it? Somebody asked Mazu, and he said, it's been 40 years since the Troubles. 40 years of barely getting by, but I've never lacked for salt and sauce. A kind of cheery message, really. Salt and sauce. So just, I don't know, let that come over you, salt and sauce. Let the somebody just wrote me, it was touching actually, wrote me from Bulgaria and said, I don't have much English. And well, I have a Bulgarian friend, I don't have much Bulgarian. So it seemed like that was a fair trade. And he said, I'm trying to do koan study, but there's nobody to do it with in Bulgaria. And he said, I'm working with the koan mu. And he said, what does it mean when they say become one with mu? And I felt like I thought, yeah, I wonder what that means. It was great. And although I've taught that way myself a million times, and it's sort of rather great because in order to understand some instructions, you have to have already received them in some way. They have to already be operating in you, and so there's some way in which we have some vague inkling of becoming one with the koan, becoming one with maybe the room we're in or the person we're with, one with the rain, the flowers, and we have those glimpses. But it's hard to get a good definition, and it's hard to get a good set of operational instructions. And so I just said to him, well, not knowing what it means, that's it. Enter there. I don't think it was very helpful for someone from Bulgaria. So I wrote him another thing later saying the same thing in longer terms, But it's a thing. So the salt and sauce is that invisible thing, Just sort of feeling the silence around you, feeling we might say, the invisible presence of the meditation of other people. Bring me something that's not medicine. I've searched the whole world and can't find something that's not medicine. Bring me something that's medicine. And he bent down and plucked a blade of grass and handed it to the Buddha. I've never lacked for salt and sauce. So the story is here. Mazu was one of the great teachers at the founding of the Chinese lineage, and actually, like most of the Zen teachers, lived in times of great turmoil and upheaval, and they're sort of it's hard. That's hard, but at a certain time in his training, his teacher said, I don't know, you should go off and found a temple somewhere, Not a lot of help doing that, but, it's like maybe not getting a lot of help in deciding where or what was kindness, So, and so he went off and he went to Jungs. And one day his teacher said, Matsu is in Jiangxi teaching a Dharma, but he's been there for decades and we haven't heard a thing. So no news coming back. And so he told one of his assistants, go to Mazu's place and wait till he gives a lecture and then ask, how is it? And what is this? How is it? What is this? And Mazu said, in 30 years since I left the time of troubles, since the time of troubles departed, in the 30 years since the time, it's really since China fell apart and people started starving and things like that, and wars just came through. It's sort of like the world today, really. In 30 years since the times of confusion, I've never lacked for salt or sauce. And his teacher, this was dutifully carried back to his teacher, who said, "Oh, very good." But since the barbarians came through, I've never lacked for salt and sauce. So it's sort of interesting, isn't it? Like, it's easy to think of what salt and sauce are. So what's salt and sauce for you? What is the thing about salt is, it's always considered symbolically marvelous because you put it in the soup and it disappears and you can't see the salt. You can't find it anywhere, but if you taste the soup, it's different, It's a bit like Zen in that way, And I suppose sauce, you can see the difference. It might color the soup or something. So it's a little bit more of a thing, But salt and sauce, they don't seem the thing itself, but they make everything good. So 30 years, and I've never lacked for salt and sauce. So if you think of the hardships you've undergone, or are undergoing, we all know, I have a friend a friend of many of us who just was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and he's going to wait a bit and have surgery, radiation and chemo, and then live as long as he can, which probably won't be terribly long, but it'll be enough to sort of, in a way, see the people he loves, things like that. Or over here it's been flooding, and one of my friends, the last flood flooded her house, and this flood came right up to the top of top of the banks and then subsided and didn't flood a house again. So then I have another friend who just went through neurosurgery. I was here today, actually. But, you know, there's a lot can go on in this life, you know, just saying. You know. And I don't know what's going on with you, but many things, you know. I have another friend who's still recovering from a very radical surgery. So, but there's always, what's the salt and sauce? What is the salt and sauce for you? You know? And I think we have many signs of the strangeness and the invisible quality, the invisible flavor of life, you know. Two things. Jung had this great story that struck me of, he said, where is it? Here it is. Anyway, it's a colleague of Jung's who was a psychoanalyst, and he lived in the... Jung said he was a peculiar person, but he had interesting ideas. Might describe some of the people in this temple. He had interesting ideas, and he lived off in a farmhouse in the country, and he had a wife and 2 children, and a maidservant. And his patients would come and stay for a while in the guest rooms of his house. And he would write down the dreams of everybody in the house, the kids, his wife, the maidservant, the patients himself. And what he discovered was that everybody in the house was dreaming about the problems of the patients and trying to help solve them. Although he never, you know, the patients didn't say what their problems were, and he never told anybody. And so there's the way in which we're invisibly connected is profound, I think. And those invisible things are part of the salt and sauce. And so if you're desperate and you're worried, you can always tell that you're neglecting that aspect of life, the aspect in which we are deeply connected, you know. Every now and again I get in a tiz about something, and usually, I don't know why, but it's sort of interesting because there's a way of sort of deepening, you know. I think, oh, I don't do that anymore, and then I do it, you know. And so it's kind of rather satisfying in a way. And and so it's a way of deepening, but we all really are connected, whether we think so or not. And here's a great thing I just ran across in, I only have this on my phone, but I just ran across in I don't know, somewhere, maybe it's the New York Times. It's a transcript of an Ezra Klein thing with a guy called Rick Rubin, so it's a blog transcript, and Rick Rubin he produces like major music albums. I just made a new album with Neil Young. It's called World Record, and the way that came about was he was hiking in Colorado daily, and he noticed he was whistling. He doesn't whistle much, he doesn't whistle well, but he noticed that he was whistling. That's a very Zen kind of comment, right? You know? Didn't say I don't whistle, he just noticed that he was. And he noticed what he was whistling was interesting. It wasn't a song he knew. And he decided to record on his little flip phone, because it's an ancient flip phone, the whistling. And he did this every day. And he collected 10 or so of these whistling melodies that if you asked him, he would say he did not write. He essentially channeled them. They just happened. And he was aware enough to capture them, and aware enough when he had a handful of them to say, you know, I think I can make this into an album. This is interesting. And he said, I like these melodies, and they're unlike any melodies I normally write. So that's the basis of this album. And we laughed in the studio. I said, I'd love to meet the guy who wrote these songs. And they don't sound like Neil Young songs. And when he sat down to write the words, he wrote the lyrics to all the songs in a couple of days without changing any words. And it just sort of happened. He said, that's never happened to him before. And this is someone who's been making albums for, I don't know, 50 years, you know, a long time. mysterious help from the unexpected help from the universe, we might say, and that's one of my readings for salt and source. That salt is that invisible thing that's. If you try to describe what's the difference, what happens when awakening happens, something like that, something like that. It's like, oh, I'm not outside of things anymore. And when really difficult things happen, there's a certain sort of illumination in them, It's like the light coming out of the salt and the source, is in you. And so I was thinking of a few things, and sometimes this just is a matter of, we try to make salt and source available to people by having an open temple thing every morning online. And it's kind of fun, and we have wonderful people running it, and all that you're exposed to is a koan and maybe a poem, and there's no teaching, you just a koan and a poem, but then you trust the invisible teaching that happens, that's the salt and source. When you can feel when a meditation hall is alive, it's got that zzz quality to it, and so that's what we're trying to do, salt and source. And so I've been thinking of other places, and sometimes that just happens, like slowly the Dharma just soaks into you, and slowly, and some people you might be teaching before it really is soaked into you, and you're sort of useful as a teacher, but you don't have a massive amount of confidence in yourself. Something like that might be happening. But nonetheless, or you might be a significant leader or something, but nonetheless, if you expose yourself to it, it soaks in, and you can't avoid it. It's a kind of nice thing to know, and you'll feel it sort of holding you in some way, and you'll just be buoyant in a way that you weren't. So that's salt, the effects of salt, the delicious effects of salt and sauce. So, and then sometimes, awakening, salt, it comes over you sort of without you expecting it, one of the things that comes to mind for me is the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, Coleridge, who was not only a great poet, but unusually among English poets was also a notable thinker, and he read a lot of German philosophy. Was the hot thing in the late 18th, early 19th century, and he introduced a lot of it and wrote about it and introduced a lot of it into the English-speaking world. But he was also a remarkable poet and friend of other poets. And he wrote these strange, he wrote reasonable poems. The frost performs its secret ministry was one of his great lines, And but he also wrote this ballad. It's called The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which is more like a fairy tale, really. And so the mariner they're in a ship and they lose the wind, and there's an albatross been following the ship, and the mariner does this terrible thing and kills the albatross just because he can, kind of thing. Something humans do all the time. So something to think, it's something touching to me. There was some cyclist got thrown out of the Italian tour because he just, I don't know what he shot. It was a little dog, I think. He was just practicing with a BB gun and decided, I'll just kill this little animal. But the little dog belonged to some important person, and he was very irate about it. But also the casual heartlessness is just part of life, and something to notice in life, something we always have to take into account, the violence of life and so on. And then the poem is really about the expiation of that and how you work that out, and then the ship became becalmed. It lost the wind. It's just sitting there. The sails are rotting. Everything is happening, and his crewmen die of lack of thirst, but he has been kept alive as in a way as the criminal. So, and he said, beyond the shadow of and the moving moon went up the sky and nowhere did abide, and no softly she was going up, and a star or two beside. Her beams bemocked the sultry main, like April hoarfrost spread, but where the ship's huge shadow lay, the charmed water burned away a still and awful red. Beyond the shadow of the ship I watched the water snakes. They moved in tracks of shining white, and when they reared, the elfish light fell off in hoary flakes. Within the shadow of the ship I watched their rich attire, blue, glossy green, and velvet black. They coiled and swam, and every track was a flash of golden fire. Oh, happy living things, no tongue their beauty might declare. A spring of love gushed from my heart, and I blessed them unaware. Sure, my kind saint took pity on me, and I blessed them unaware. The self-same moment I could pray, and from my neck so free the albatross fell off and sank like lead into the sea. So they'd put the rotting albatross around his neck, as you know, and then he fell asleep for the first time for months, and that broke the curse. But that's the thing about him blessing the creatures, blessing the sea snakes, and you'll feel that in yourself if you bless the birds, the animals, the trees. You'll feel that the kindness that is in the world, the invisible quality of things that nourishes us, is there. So it's a nice thing. And there was something else here. And so then we, in a certain sense, that would be salt and sauce. The old Chinese poets write about all the time. Just that quality of being illuminated and supported in life. You ask, this is Li Bai, you ask why I stay on the green mountain. I smile but do not answer. My heart is at peace. Peach blossom is carried off far away by flowing water. Here I have heaven and earth in the human realm. So, yeah, there we are. And so I think it's a good thing to notice how the salt and sauce is always available, no matter how hard we think our lives are. What I've noticed is sometimes I complain to myself, sometimes I complain to others, but sometimes even in the complaint you can feel the salt and sauce, you can feel the sort of beauty of connection, but in general I notice that the next step is to just go deeper and what is the beauty in this, so when something dark and hard comes for us, what is the gift? What is the gift of the dark qualities? I want to read you another thing of this is a rather wonderful thing about someone's not much read anymore, but Chateau Beyond was a French intellectual who was a minor nobility, and he went to Paris to get an education at the same time as the revolution broke out, which was like either terrible timing or very good timing. And he said, before the revolution, when I read the history of public disturbances among the different nations, I could not conceive of how people lived in such times. I was astonished that Montaigne, one of the great earlier French writers, could write so cheerfully in a castle that he could not so much stroll around without running the risk of being abducted and captured, And he's in there writing about, the wisdom of the great classical writers and things like that, which is and he's great, you know. But he never mentions the disturbances, and meanwhile there's riots outside the walls and people trying to get in and kill him and things. So that was his salt and sauce. The revolution made me understand, this is Chateau Beyond again, how it is possible to live under such conditions. Moments of crisis redouble the life of a person. In a society that's dissolving and recomposing itself, the struggle of two spirits, the clash of past and future, the intermingling of old ways and new, makes for a transitory concoction that leaves no time for boredom. Passions and characters set at liberty are displayed with an energy unimaginable in a well-regulated place. The breaches of the law, the freedom from duties, customs and good manners, even the dangers intensify the appeal of this disorder. The human race on holiday strolls down the street, rid of its masters and restored for a moment to its natural state. It feels no need of a civic bridle until it shoulders the yoke of the new tyrants, which the license has bred, you know. I think there are parallels in our time, of you know, just the disorder breaking out and people being so delighted in disorder. And he said, popular delegations, cavalry pickets, and infantry patrols just marched every which way in the streets, just for the sake of marching, you know. So people would go on parade. It's like the theatre. And beside a man in French dress with powdered hair, a sword at his side, a hat under his arm, leather shoes and silk stockings, walked a man with unpowdered hair cropped close to his skull, dressed in an English frock coat and an American cravat. And I can stop there, but you know nuns were thrown out of convents and then sort of took refuge with whoever they could, which might be the prostitutes or thing, and so the immense sort of mixing of the kinds of things. And Chateau Beyond, perhaps wisely, decided to take a long holiday, exploratory holiday in America at the time, so he missed the guillotine, which would have come for him as an aristocrat, you know. But there's some way in which, in the midst of the madness of events, you know, we can be at peace. You know, we just have to be at peace, because when else are you going to be at peace? And and I think our work in Zen, that's mainly the thing of our work in Zen. So, and then what do you do? So what did Ma Zu do during the time of troubles? He just taught meditation. He ran a temple, you know, and he's kind of my hero. And he said that great thing. He said a number of really great things that we've quoted a lot. But he didn't. There's not that much that he wrote survived because, you know, times of troubles. And he one of the things he said was to make of yourself a raft. You know, you make yourself a raft to carry. And the idea is, you know, you carry people to the other shore, and that's what you can do when there's no way. You make yourself a raft and you carry people to the other shore. Where are we? I have this written down somewhere. Here we are. This is the right way to say it. To advance from where you can no longer advance, and do what can no longer be done, you must make yourself into a raft or ferry boat for others. And the other great consoling thing, this is about the salt that is available to everyone. He said, no sentient being for countless eons, no being for countless eons has ever left the samadhi of Dharma nature, the deep meditation of Dharma nature. So what you're in right now, your eyes see things, your ear hears things. In the samadhi of Dharma nature, we wear clothes and eat food, talk together, have conversations. The functioning of our senses and the carrying out of our activities is nothing but Dharma nature. And one of the things I mean, when I first heard this, I suppose I found it somewhat consoling, you know. But I think the deeper thing is it's true. And you can feel the truth of it when you, every time you meditate, you can feel, oh, it comes up to us, like that, it just comes over us. And each matter you encounter, the truth of this very moment is the meaning of your life, like that. And because somehow we know that. We know we don't get another moment, right? And so, and the other thing I wanted to say was, I was thinking about salt, and I was thinking about, salt used to be, the Roman legionnaires were sometimes paid in salt because it was sort of fungible, you could trade it for things, it was so important. And I think the government probably had a monopoly on salt, so they could just mine the wages of the legionnaires, But in Bhutan is a tiny little Himalayan leftover place. It's still got some medieval features, I think, just below eastern Tibet, and it's the place anyway, and it's probably the place where old Tibet still exists to some degree, And they didn't have a currency until, I don't know, maybe 50 years ago, 60 years ago. They used salt. Salt was their currency, and people would have to trek up over the mountains. They have very high mountains themselves, but they had to trek up over the big high mountains into Tibet proper and get Tibetan salt. And you've seen that salt sometimes in stores. It's often pinkish. And they would have, the rich or the powerful lamas or the powerful barons would have these huge coffers full of salt in the front hall, of their house, and that was their currency, So, and then later on they tied their currency to India, and they got a currency, things like that, and decided to speak make English an official language, which was one way of dealing with India, actually. But so. And there's another salt story I'll just tell you right now. There's one of those King Lear sort of fairy tales that actually Alison Atwell drew my attention to. It's called Cup of Rushes, and it's one of those clueless old patriarchs who asks his daughters who loves him the most, how much do you love me? And it's not a question you should ever ask anyone. But anyway, and one of them says, oh, as much as the stars and the sky and the air I breathe, and the other one says, as much as all the lands and the wealth of nations and all the kindness in the world. And the third one, the youngest one, of course, says, as much as meat loves salt. And so he banishes her and just throws her out naked into the wilderness. This is an English tale. And so she makes a dress for herself of rushes, and since she doesn't tell her name, then she goes and works as a servant in a castle somewhere else, and she's a pretty refined, intelligent person, and becomes a tremendous cook, and then eventually meets the prince, and they fall in love, and there's a big wedding ceremony for her, and then she gets a better dress than her rushes, and her father and her sisters are invited to the ceremony, and they see, and they don't recognize her, of course, because some years have passed, and so at the wedding feast she insults the cooks not to put any salt in any of the food, and so that's the enlightening moment for her father, who's at the wedding feast. I thought it was kind of an interesting thing about salt. I have a friend who, I learned this yesterday, and I want to meditate. I'll just tell this little story. He's a very interesting guy, and he's a physician, trop medicine. And he was in this medical system that had it was just really just like the Chinese emperors or something, had a very, very, very rich funder and a very, very noble vision. But the rich funder insisted that everybody was employed only at will, so they'd be fired any moment. And so you can imagine what happened. So the vision got going and seemed wonderful, and they had really talented people, including my Trop Med friend, and then suddenly. And someone else got the ear of the emperor and said they weren't doing very well and they weren't doing operations right, the sort of thing. And they were never going to make money and stuff like that. And everybody got fired, really, except my Trop Med friend who was off doing sort of numbers somewhere and like trying to change the whole health system. And they didn't notice him and didn't fire him. But then eventually he resigned. There's a certain way in which, and then naturally the whole system's now crashing and so on, declining, and the CEO who manipulated and schemed to get the old CEO out and things, and is now looking for another job and things. But it's sort of salt and sauce, that you need. There's an invisible quality that you can't really measure. You can't measure by the usual ways we measure things. And we might say love is like that. You can't say I love you because I love you more than. You can't, like the Caparascia story is great like that. You can't put, you can't put quantities on it. So, we just love each other, and mainly we notice we love each other rather than having exercise for. That's why I'm not very into loving kindness. It always makes me feel pissed off with things when I'm trying to be loving. But if I just notice what is, the lovingness is there. So it's like that. Salt and sauce. Let's meditate, eh? How old is that sound? Is the sound inside or outside? Does it belong to you or the world? So for a long time, Mazu had been off teaching. And then his teacher nobody had heard, which wasn't in itself remarkable, but she said, well, I wonder how he's doing. Why don't you go off and find out? Wait till he gives a talk and then ask, how is it? How is it? And so the person goes off to Mazu's temple, and Mazu gives a talk, and he asks, how is it? And Mazu said, since the time of the barbarian invasions, it's been 30 years, of barely getting by, but I've never lacked for salt and sauce. 30 years of just getting by, but I've never lacked for salt and sauce. So whatever part of that great saying touches you, just let yourself, I suppose, let it touch you. Let it carry you, let it transform your mind into a vastness that you cannot measure. You don't have to put it off. It's now. You don't have to wait for the right moment. Salt and sauce is happening now. Transformation into the vastness. No one knows its extent. It's happening now. Ah, thank you. Donna just said, I can't hear you. So this is a strange story, but corporations are always having coups and things like that and so on, and it's always worse in good cause organizations because people try to, pretend they're doing well when they're cutting each other's, up, sort of thing. But the person who had done, sort of in a way, gotten everybody fired by whispering in the funder's ear, then and became the new CEO. Then she called my friend and said, "Could you help find me another job because I can't run the place without the people who aren't there anymore." And I said to him, "Well, what did you say?" And he said, "Well, she might learn something." I said, "Yes." And I found her another job, at least another interview. And I thought that was very touching. It's a salt and sauce, He's sort of, he's kind of a tough guy too, so he's not fluffy, But I was touched by that. But good for you. No, I've never lacked since the barbarians came. You don't even have to hate the barbarians, right? Since the time of the barbarians, I've never lacked for salt and sauce. And perhaps you can just relax and enjoy yourself and feel the vastness. It's been 30 years of barely getting by, but I've never lacked for salt and sauce. Wind and rain here, the sound. That too is the sound of the temple bell. One of my main teacher, actually, who was Robert Aiken, sometimes in the middle of session, he'd talk about the ever-living presence of usually Soen Nakagawa, a great koan master and poet, and sort of possibly somewhat mad, but very creative and strange. And the ever-living presence, and I feel that about Mazu, he's with us now. He's not with us. And the same way we can dream for each other, we can have dreams about for other people. We can have other people's dreams, things like that. We can be accompanied. Being dead is not an obstacle to teaching us. So Mazu, I feel that way about. I can feel his breath and his shoulders with us in the temple, his big broad shoulders, it's nice. So somebody else, Ellen Fox, pointed out that Neruda has a great poem about salt, which I'd completely forgotten about, so check that out afterwards too. And I think the thing about salt is it's common as salt. So it's in our own commonality. It's in our hands and our hearts and our hair and all that. In the room. Okay, Alison, do you have anything you want to say?
I remember years ago reading a poem, and it had the directions for happiness, and it listed all the things that one should do. And the only one I can remember was it said that one should read the news no more than twice a year. And I'm often in my house, I'm often up before anyone else. So there'll be an hour or sometimes a couple of hours where I'm unloading the dishwasher or stoking the fire or doing various things or checking email, and I get something from the New York Times and if I look at the news, I can feel, sometimes it can sort of gather this sense of doom, like imminent doom in the quality of what's being presented. And it's a kind of, I don't know, it's like the opposite of salt and sauce. It's some kind of despair or something. And then we had our sheep Poppet who died of old age last summer, and her food is this cob. We had a big metal trash can full of cob with nothing to do with it. So John had this idea, well, maybe we'll try feeding the birds. And it turns out our quail are just crazy for this sheep cob, except they'll eat everything, but they won't eat the barley, and they leave all the barley. We don't know why, it's still mysterious. But in the mornings, they now know that breakfast is about to come. So John gets this pan of cob, and it almost looks like St. Francis of Assisi, you know, all the birds starting to gather, and I see the quail, who I just adore. I see them through the arch of the rose arbor, and they're shoaling there like salmon outside the Golden Gate, and there's just dozens and dozens and dozens of these quail waiting for John to scatter it and then leave, and then they come pouring through, running through the arbor. And it's one of the most, like, the joy that pours through my being is like the salt and sauce is so extreme, and the happiness, common thing, the salt and sauce.
That's like Coleridge and the Sea Snakes. The joy we have in other people's joy, the joy we have in life itself is a profound thing, and so I think quail are so, they're getting fat, which is my fault, and things like that. But they're sort of they're like dowagers. They like waddle around, and they're pretty non-violent with each other, although sometimes they are. But they're kind of incredibly endearing creatures, and so they're all waiting there. It's kind of fun. Tess.
The story that kept coming to mind as we were sitting was a few years ago. A friend took me to the townships in Cape Town, and extremely kind of impoverished area, and shacks and tarps, and took me to this house where all these young people had gotten together, and what they realized is that in order to stay out of gangs or stay out of trouble or just sort of stay out of hopelessness in a certain way, they had made a choir, and every day, twice a day, they would get together and sing.
Wow.
And so I sat in this house where the walls were sort of, half peeling off, and on the floor there were little bones left over that they'd give whatever they'd left, eaten to the dogs that they had. And about 4 of them sat together and just sang for us. And every time they'd sing, I'd start weeping. And they had such incredible joy and life, and these songs that they would create, and the little toddler would come sit in her mother's lap and kind of try to join in, and everything would happen. And when we left their house, just being with them for a few hours, there was a body in the streets that had been killed while we were on our way out. And so it was just like, in one way, being in this, the troubles had long started, in Mazu's world, and yet there was this kind of richness of life and being that was just carrying on no matter what was happening. And somehow that experience has always stayed with me. Kind of feels like the salt and sauce.
Thank you. Jesse Carden.
Yeah. we're in the middle of a move across the Pacific Ocean right now from Washington State to Hawaii, and our house is almost empty. We have an old couch and we have like a mattress topper on the floor, and not much stuff around. And the stuff that is around is in total disarray. And every time that we might try to organize it, our toddler will deorganize it for us. So it feels like, in one way, there's this great poverty of the usual kind of familiar things. We've got one pot, one cooking pot, 2 forks, 2 knives, 2 spoons, but there's no lack in any of it. It's amazing, and that's actually a tremendous fullness that comes out of that. And the more things that go wrong with our move, the house hasn't closed after 2 weeks after the closing date, and can't get a hold of this person, can't get a hold of that person, the move is going to be more expensive, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The strange thing is, the freer I feel, they're just moving deeper and deeper into the troubled times in a way. It's kind of first world problems, but still the amount of uncertainty that comes out of a situation like that feels like I'm just buffeted up by it, up rather than dragged down. It's an incredible thing. So I thought, well, I should probably, that's what we're going to do a one-day retreat about next Saturday. I thought, well, this is a great place to be in. How do we find our way through those times where all the usual things have fallen apart, and barrier after barrier appears? How do we navigate through that? So I don't know, I'm having a lot of fun, things going wrong, and thanks. Salt and sauce. Never lacked for salt and sauce.
Thank you for telling me to unmute. I keep talking, and Jesse's going to be here next Sunday, and he's going to do a one-day next Saturday. Christopher.
Hi. This is the first time I've sat with your Sangha. I just wanted to say thank you for your thoughts. I appreciated hearing the talk. And it reminded me of one of my absolute favorite quotes from the French poet Baudelaire. He says, "The marvelous envelops and nourishes us like an atmosphere, only we don't notice it."
I'm glad I called on you. That's a wonderful quote. And a great, great poet. Hard to quote in English sometimes, so well done. Thank you. Okay, you know what? I have all these dear people I want to hear from, but we're going to hear from meditation. The sound of the temple, the ancient temple bell, ringing through the centuries, ringing through the rain. I've never lacked for salt and sauce. Mazu is also the first person who, as far as I know, it might not be true, but said, ordinary mind is the way, ordinary mind is the Tao. But he meant, mostly people think he means something that I don't think he means, but he meant the tremendous liveliness in what is already here, the enchantment that is already here. I've never lacked for salt and sauce. I've never lacked for salt and sauce. You know, the meditation, you can tell the meditation is somehow inside everything and also surrounding everything. And so that sort of the idea of illumination, that there's a kind of light that you can't necessarily say what color it is that's inside everything. Somebody said this great thing on I don't often forget to read or don't read, or the chat crawl. Somebody said, a couple of people said this great thing. Tim and Ann said, John, does source mean a well or a spring, as in a water source? And I said, well, it can mean either in English, but this one is S-A-U-C-E, like sauce as in soy or tomato or something. And he said, they said, I don't know, one of them said, meditating on the wrong word, thanks. And I said, it's always the right word. So it was rather lovely meditating on what is the source? Is itself a koan? The source as in S-O-U-R-C-E, the origin. In French, the source, yeah. What is the source? The flowing water, there's a Chinese koan that's sort of confusing in English that way. The flowing water does not know the spring. It actually means the spring, the spring of the flowers. You know. I didn't unmute again. Somebody's saying, are you muted or is it just me? It's always me. John Joseph, do you have a small thing to say?
Well, I'm just struck at how personal this koan somehow seems to me, for reasons that hard to express. When you said just let it wash over you, you know, that was like a very personal message to me. I mean, the rain and the downspouts, just a very personal message. And, yeah, thank you.
What was the message?
Something like that.
Okay. Angela, do you have any small thing to say?
Well, I guess just thinking about how we're salt and sauce too. That things want to taste us in the way that we want to taste them. Just the way the world comes towards us. So that's all. Thanks.
Thanks. That's great. Thank you. Eduardo, do you have a small thing to say?
For me, the source and soul come from recognizing it as part of my life, whatever it is. No internet, hitting my head against the soil, whatever. If I recognize, or life recognizing itself, that's it. Immediately the joy comes.
Very good. Fortunately, I hit my head today.
Well,
No, I'm like that too. Fortunately, I forgot to unmute, and I gave this very eloquent talk that I can't remember, but things like that. Okay, thank you, Eduardo. Amaryllis.
I vow to wake all the beings of the world. I vow to set endless heartache to rest. I vow to walk through every wisdom gate. I vow to live the great Buddha way. I vow to wake all the beings of the world. I vow to set endless heartache to rest. I vow to walk through every wisdom gate. I vow to live the great Buddha way. I vow to wake all the beings of the world. I vow to set endless heartache to rest. I vow to walk through every wisdom gate. I vow to live the great Buddha way.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Thanks to the musicians, Micheal and Jesse and Amaryllis's wonderful violin and organizing. And thank you, everyone who spoke and all the teachers and all of you. We're in it together, aren't we?